Carl Jung once discovered something shocking about spiritual awakening. It doesn't fill you with energy, it empties you. After studying countless patients who went through profound awakenings, Jung noticed a strange pattern. Nearly 70% of them lost all motivation within months. Not because they failed, but because they succeeded too well in seeing through life's illusions. He called this the awakening paradox, the moment when clarity turns into confusion, when enlightenment collapses into emptiness, when spiritual victory feels like a psychological crisis. Maybe you've felt it yourself. You expected awakening to ignite a fire of purpose, but instead, every flame that once drove you has gone out. You're lying in bed, more conscious than ever, yet unable to care about anything. Old goals seem hollow, meaningless. Even things you used to love feel like empty distractions. But Jung's great insight was this. This emptiness isn't failure. It's not a sign you've lost your way. It's a necessary stage of transformation. And if you understand how to move through it, this void becomes the birthplace of the most authentic purpose you'll ever know. We've been told that awakening leads to bliss, clarity, and passion. But Jung realized the opposite. The deeper you awaken, the more you recognize that most of your old goals were illusions. They weren't truly yours. They were borrowed dreams, ego-driven, fear-based, or inherited from society. He explained this through alchemy. In ancient texts, the first stage of transformation was called the nigredo, or the blackening. In psychology, Jung saw this as the death of the old self. Your former identity dissolves. Everything that used to drive you, career ambitions, social recognition, even love, suddenly loses its power. You're stuck in a strange limbo, too awake to go back to your old illusions, but not yet reborn into something new. It feels like a void, like nothing matters. And here's the danger. Most people mistake this stage for depression. They think they've failed spiritually. They try to get their old motivation back. But Jung warned doing that is like trying to push a butterfly back into its cocoon. It's not only impossible, it betrays your own evolution. To really understand this, Jung told the story of one of his patients, Maria. Maria had been on a long spiritual path, meditation, study, practices. One day, she experienced what mystics call ego death, a total dissolution of her identity into universal consciousness. For weeks, she was euphoric. She had touched something divine, seen through the illusion of separation. Everything that once troubled her now seemed meaningless. But then came the collapse. She couldn't get out of bed. She quit her job, stopped eating, ended her relationships, not from sadness, but from profound indifference. "I've seen the truth," she told Jung. "Nothing matters. Goals are illusions. Achievements are ego games. Love is attachment. Work is distraction. I can't pretend any of it has meaning." Most spiritual teachers at the time would have seen Maria as broken, but Jung recognized something different. She wasn't failing, she was in the nigredo. Her old self had died, but the new one hadn't yet been born. This was the chrysalis stage, like the caterpillar dissolved into formless goo before becoming a butterfly. Jung had studied alchemy for years and understood it as a symbolic map of human transformation. He realized Maria wasn't lost. She was in the necessary death phase that precedes rebirth. But he also discovered something shocking. In the modern world, spiritual practices often lead people into this state without giving them the tools to navigate it. He called this premature enlightenment. People glimpse higher states of consciousness without having the psychological strength to integrate them. It's like performing surgery on yourself without knowing anatomy. Maria had seen through the illusions of ordinary life, but she had no framework for living with this knowledge. She was psychologically homeless, too awake to return to unconscious living, but not yet integrated enough to create a new life. Jung's work with Maria became the foundation of what he later called individuation, the process of becoming a whole, authentic self. He helped her see that her emptiness wasn't a void to be feared. It was sacred space, a place where something entirely new could be born. This discovery changed Jung's understanding of spirituality forever. He realized awakening isn't about bliss, it's about death and rebirth. Most people think they're signing up for permanent peace, but in truth, they're volunteering for the destruction of everything false in them. That's why it feels terrifying. That's why it feels empty. Yet Jung found something remarkable. The people who learned to wait in the emptiness consciously, who resisted the urge to rush back into old goals, began to feel a new kind of motivation arise. It wasn't driven by fear, ego, or the need for approval. It was quieter, subtler, a calling from deep within. What Jung called soul-driven purpose. Carl Jung discovered that this strange emptiness after awakening was not an ending, but the beginning of something extraordinary. He noticed that all human motivation falls into two categories. The first is persona-driven motivation. This comes from the false self, the mask we wear to gain approval, avoid rejection, and maintain a social identity. It includes career ambitions, relationship goals, achievements, and the endless chase for status. The second is self-driven motivation. This comes from the authentic core that exists beyond social conditioning. It doesn't look for validation because it is aligned with who you really are. Here lies the paradox Jung uncovered. Awakening destroys persona-driven motivation long before self-driven motivation emerges. You're left in a gap. The old fuel is gone, but the new fuel hasn't yet appeared. This gap can last months, even years. Most people panic. They try to restart their old goals, but Jung warned that this is like trying to reanimate a corpse. It might move for a while, but it won't truly live. Yet something remarkable happens to those who learn to sit consciously in the void. They begin noticing subtle impulses that feel different from the old drives. These aren't born of fear or pressure. They come from what Jung called the soul's calling. Sarah, one of his patients, explained it perfectly. I used to be driven by fear of failure and rejection. When that motivation died, I thought I was broken. But slowly, new impulses appeared. I wanted to create, not to impress anyone, but because creating felt like breathing. I wanted to help, not to look good, but because suffering moved something deep in me. This is the essence of soul motivation. It doesn't push, it calls, it whispers instead of shouts. It doesn't feel like I have to. It feels like I get to. It's sustainable because it doesn't come from scarcity. It comes from abundance. Jung realized you cannot force this kind of motivation. You can only create the conditions for it to emerge. Through his research, he identified 3 stages. The first is dissolution. Old desires die and must be grieved. The second is coagulation. New desires slowly form from within. The third is integration. These new, soul-driven motivations become your guiding force. The problem is that most spiritual teachings skip over the difficulty of this transition. They tell you to follow your bliss, but fail to mention the long silence that often comes before it. Jung taught that you must consciously compost your old purposes and be willing to sit in the uncertainty. That uncertainty is fertile soil for authentic purpose. One of Jung's most powerful discoveries was what he called purpose poisoning. He realized that many people spend decades pursuing goals they think are meaningful, only to feel empty when they achieve them. Why? Because those goals were never truly theirs. They were elaborate ego defenses, designed to cover up feelings of inadequacy. He found that almost 90% of what people call purpose is actually an attempt to avoid being unloved, unworthy, or insignificant. This is why awakening strips everything bare. Once you see through the illusion of the separate self, you can also see through the illusion that achievements will fulfill you. Suddenly, everything you've been chasing looks like smoke. Jung illustrated this with another patient, Thomas. Thomas had built a successful business, believing he was motivated by passion, but after a profound awakening, his motivation evaporated. "I realize now I built this company out of fear," he told Jung. "Fear of being a failure, fear of not being enough, and now the whole thing feels like a house of cards." Jung explained that Thomas wasn't broken. He was liberated, free from the unconscious fears that once controlled his every decision. But Jung also knew this freedom is dangerous if you don't replace false purposes with authentic ones. The psyche cannot live in meaninglessness forever. If you don't cultivate true purpose, you either relapse into ego-driven goals or remain paralyzed in a void. To address this, Jung created the purpose archaeology process, a way to excavate authentic calling from beneath years of conditioning. It begins with what he called desire discrimination, learning to tell the difference between ego desires and soul desires. Ego desires always have a because. I want success because then people will respect me. I want money because I'm afraid of being poor. Soul desires stand alone. I want to create. I want to love. I want to explore. They don't need justification. To help patients shift, Jung developed a 3-stage framework he called the psychological resurrection process. Stage 1 is conscious dissolution. Here, you grieve your old goals intentionally. Patients would write farewell letters to their former ambitions, thanking them for the energy they once provided, and letting them go. This sacred grieving allowed the psyche to release the past. Stage 2 is active imagination. Instead of forcing a new purpose, patients would open a dialogue with their unconscious. They would ask, "What wants to be born through me?" and then wait for images, words, or feelings to surface. This wasn't fantasy, it was a direct line to the hidden self. One patient began receiving visions of teaching children outdoors. She had never considered teaching before, but when she followed the impulse, she found a joy deeper than anything she had known. Stage 3 is symbolic living. Rather than chasing rigid plans, Jung taught people to follow symbols and synchronicities. If something repeatedly appears in your life and energizes you, it's a sign. Live symbolically, he said, and life itself becomes your guide. Through this process, Jung discovered that authentic motivation feels entirely different from ego motivation. Ego motivation feels urgent, anxious, pressured. Soul motivation feels calm, magnetic, inevitable. It doesn't drain energy, it generates it. Jung's later research led him to one final revelation. He called it incarnated purpose. When your deepest essence finds expression in the world, your life becomes an extension of something greater. It's no longer about chasing purpose. Purpose begins to live through you. He saw this in a patient named Elena. Before awakening, she was a marketing executive chasing success. After awakening, she lost interest in her career and drifted in emptiness for 2 years. Slowly, she began painting again, something she had loved as a child. She never intended to make it her career, but soon her art began touching people, helping them heal grief. Elena realized her purpose wasn't to become a famous artist, but to express beauty that healed others. She wasn't striving. She was simply allowing her soul to flow. Jung warned that this path requires courage. Soul purpose often defies conventional success. You may earn less, receive less recognition, or face misunderstanding, but the trade-off is authenticity. You are no longer living for approval. You are living as yourself. The ultimate insight Jung gave us is this: the emptiness after awakening isn't absence, it is presence. The presence of motivation so pure your ego cannot recognize it. Your old goals had to die because they were blocking what he called the life that wants to live through you. The void isn't empty, it's pregnant with new life. If you are in this stage, Jung's advice is simple but profound. Practice conscious waiting. Stop trying to resurrect old ambitions or force new ones. Each day, ask quietly, What wants to emerge through me? Then listen. Don't judge what comes. Trust that your soul knows its timing. You are not broken for losing motivation after awakening. You are being prepared for a purpose so authentic, it will transform not only your life, but everyone your life touches. Write in the comments, "I trust the process." Together, we can build a community that understands that spiritual emptiness is not the end. It's the beginning of something extraordinary. If you're ready to explore more of Jung's insights, watch my next video on Carl Jung's warning about narcissists, where I uncover the final trick they use to manipulate and control. It's a truth that could protect your freedom. Thank you for watching. See you in the next dimension.